So in the last talk, we looked at Alexander Hamilton's background, where he came from, experiences he had in his youth, and so on. Today we're going to focus on not just how that led to values, we're going to be talking about that, but also how that then led to a vision about how there might be this new fledgling country and what it might look like. And then a design of how do you actually implement that? How do you make that happen? So it's that triptych of values, vision, design. And for the next couple of talks, we're going to be re-emphasizing that over and over. How values can lead to a vision, how vision can then lead to a design. So when we left off last time talking about Alexander Hamilton, he had gone from rags to at least a very stable life in what was to be the United States. He had married into this prominent Schuyler family. He'd gotten a surrogate father in George Washington, and he begins to get a lot of visibility in especially in New York, which was his home colony, or now state, after they won the War of Independence. And after that war was completed, they then decided to write a constitution. How can we set up the new government? And because of his role in the Revolutionary War, Alexander Hamilton was selected to be a part of that constitutional convention. Now that was really remarkable because he was only 32 years old, and he became the representative of New York. There were two representatives from each state, and he represented New York. New York and Virginia were the two big dogs at this constitutional convention because they were the two largest states. So he had a very, very prominent position at a very young age there. And he was a big advocate. He had very strong values about what this form of government ought to be and how it ought to then provoke this new country. And he was extremely outspoken. Now, honestly, he didn't win a lot of those battles. He got a little bloodied and beat up in that constitutional convention because he had strong ideas that were different from some of the other people that were there. But he certainly made his case very, very well and won a lot of respect. Then the Constitution was written, and it had to be ratified by all 13 of the new states. And in order to try to get that to happen, it was by no means certain it would happen. He and James Madison wrote the Federalist Papers, and actually he did more writing than Madison did. But the Federalist Papers were documents that made an advocacy for the Constitution, kind of explained the reasoning behind the stipulations in the Constitution and how they would work. And of course, then they became the document by which courts said this is constitutional or this is not constitutional, because the Federalist Papers were there to back them up. And honestly, some of those things where Hamilton might not have won in the Constitutional Convention, he slipped in a few things in the Federalist Papers that certainly had a big influence on the way the Constitution was interpreted and was applied later. So he became this huge advocate. Madison was from Virginia, one of the big dog states. He was from New York, the other big dog state. Those two states adopted the Constitution, and then they were advocates among the other states to try to get them to adopt it too. And finally, all 13 states did that. Now, at that point, George Washington, Alexander Hamilton's mentor, is made president of the United States. And one of the things Washington does is, this guy's been his right-hand man. He wants to continue to have him as his right-hand man as president, and he makes him the Secretary of Treasury. And that's why we see Hamilton's face on the $10 bill. And on the opposite side of the bill is the Treasury building. He was the guy who started the Department of Treasury and really set up the financial underpinnings for what was to be the United States. And I would say this is one of the amazing creative things that he did, was he basically set up what capitalism is. Now, the US is known for democracy, but we may be even more influential for capitalism. And that capitalism was substantially invented and created by Alexander Hamilton. And that's acknowledged by his, most of our bills have presidents' faces on them, you know, Washington and Lincoln and Grant and Jefferson. But right up with those other presidents is Alexander Hamilton, because of the role he played in really establishing our early government. And so it was certainly in the realm of the Treasury Department and the financial underpinnings and capitalism. That was one huge contribution. But also Alexander Hamilton had a lot to do with what the various branches of the government did. He put much more power in the executive branch, in the Federalist Papers, and then in his initial role as Secretary of Treasury, he helped Washington to really take maybe more of a strong role as president than had been anticipated by some others. And in fact, the party that came out of that were called the Federalists because they believed in a strong federal government and in a strong presidency as part of that. So he had a role in the laying out of the financial underpinnings of the country, but also the kind of balance of power in the government as well. Now, I would say that there are some values of Hamilton that we can see very clearly coming from his upbringing and then translating into what he did as a creative problem solver in the early days of the country. One thing he believed in very strongly was stability through government. He had seen what kind of chaos can be produced with a weak government, as in the Caribbean, and where it just became lawlessness and it became very difficult to survive. So he wanted a strong and stable government, and he believed that that really needed to be the federal government, not state governments. He was a very strong abolitionist. He had seen the evils of slavery up close and personal in his life in the Caribbean. He thought the treatment of slaves was inhumane and just absolutely, completely contradictory to this notion of all men are created equal. So he was a very strong abolitionist, and that was one of the things he argued for in the Constitutional Convention that he got nixed on it. He wanted to have slavery prevented in the Constitution, but the southern states would not agree to that, and in the end, it didn't get in the Constitution. Of course, if it had been in there, then we might not have had that Civil War in the 1860s, which was a horrible, horrible thing, and might have been prevented if from the beginning the Constitution had taken care of that. A third very strong value he had was upward mobility. This, of course, was his story, but he thought that people should have a chance to rise above their beginnings. And this was a revolutionary idea for sure in the whole world, because the world was all about whatever you were born into, that's what you lived the rest of your life. He had seen the power of upward mobility in his own life and his ability to rise from humble beginnings to success. And he thought everyone should have an opportunity for upward mobility. And that meant that they needed to be given education and given a chance. The fourth thing was meritocracy, that it shouldn't be about what family you came from. It should be what can you do? What can you produce? What value do you bring to the situation? And there's very strong advocate of meritocracy. And then the fifth value was that he believed very strongly in a mercantile economy. This is the beginning of the mercantile age. He's seeing the importance of mercantile economies as the driver of the future. And agricultural age, That's not going to be the big dog in the room in the future. And he had had that experience in the mercantile world as a young apprentice and understood trade and how that kind of economy worked. So he wanted the United States to be very much a mercantile economy. So from those values that you can see coming from his background, he then had a vision for what the United States would be based on those values. So one thing very strong is that he wanted the U.S. to be a country that could rival the powers of Europe, that had the kind of strength of Great Britain and France and Spain. And that was by no means, I mean, that was way out there as a dream in 1790s. It was just, that was a kind of crazy idea. But he believed that the United States could play that kind of role. He also thought the United States should be financially interdependent with Europe. He did not want to be an isolationist. He believed that we needed to trade back and forth with these economies in Europe, and that we need to do what we do the best, let them do what they do the best, and be interdependent, and everyone would be stronger if there were that kind of global interaction. He believed that there should be available capital to encourage entrepreneurship. This is a key to upward mobility. If someone can get a loan and they can start their business, that gives them an opportunity. If they have no access to capital, then they're held down. And so he was a very strong advocate of having good access to capital for entrepreneurship. So how did he propose to do this? What was his design? Again, very much coming out of those values and vision came a plan. And we talked about design being a plan, a kind of outline, a sketch, a direction. And he believed, number one, that we should create a very strong federal government and that it should be dominant over the state governments. This was by no means inevitable, even after the Constitution, because we had started as 13 separate colonies. In the war, there had been 13 separate military organizations, and the Continental Army was just an agglomeration of all the state militias. So it was very much a collection of 13 individual governments. And Alexander Hamilton really believed that there needed to be great centralization of power in the federal government. And so his plan was, number one, that the federal government should assume all the debts of the states. So many of the states had, in trying to raise an army and trying to fight the war, they had gone into considerable debt. And it was very irregular. Some states had been very responsible and could easily pay off their debt. Some states were pretty much bankrupt. And he said, if we're going to be a strong country as a whole, we've got to make sure those debts get taken care of. And that needs to be done by the federal government assuming all those debts of the state. And he was very clever in how he managed this, because particularly the Virginians did not want that to happen. They had been responsible with their debt. They didn't feel like they should be having to be responsible for any other state's inordinate debt. So they didn't want this provision. But he horse traded and moved the capital from New York, which was his home state, down to Washington, to a new city that would have been built essentially in Virginia. And that horse trade allowed them to accept the fact that the federal government would assume the debts of the states, and they would get the capital of the country closer to them. So that was the first thing. Very important. It began to then give him the ability to operate financially as a whole country and not have to worry about all these separate debts of all the different states. The second thing that he designed was a federal treasury that would manage the debt, pay off the debt, through imposing excise tax and customs revenue. So he believed in trade. All the trade would be taxed. That would bring in some money. And then there would be excise taxes on things like whiskey, generally luxury taxes. There wasn't so much controversy about the customs tax. People didn't think it'd be that much. He made that trade much bigger and made the taxes much more lucrative because of it. He also established the Coast Guard, which was there to police smuggling, to keep the smugglers from being able to bring things in without paying the taxes. He also made a whole series of lighthouses that would help protect the shoreline and make it hard for the smugglers. All of these things were governmental functions that he funded through these revenues from customs and from excise taxes. He felt like we needed a strong central bank. If we were going to have this system of capitalism, we needed to have a strong banking system, and that meant a strong federal bank. And then he also believed that we needed a diversified market economy. He had seen how single crops like sugar in the Caribbean had been so difficult. If the price of sugar goes down, your whole economy is wrecked. The Virginians thought tobacco, that's the ticket, man. And they were perfectly happy with a kind of single crop. But he believed in diversified market economy and that the United States should have some agriculture, and that should be strong. There should be some industry, and that should be strong. There should be some manufacturing, and that should be strong. That there should be a diversification in the economy. So again, this comes from his background and his values, looking at trade and mercantilism as very important. A fifth design element was to establish a stable currency. He had seen how all the different currencies in the Caribbean didn't work. There needed to be one currency for all of the 13 colonies, and it needed to be backed by some strong financial strength, which was the federal government. He actually even designed the money, the way our money looks in the very beginning. And he was the one who established the mint and figured out how to make the money. All of that was a part of Hamilton's doing. So there's a very clear set of values. They led to a very clear vision for what America would be and to a very strong design for how we would get there. Now, in the next couple of talks, we're going to be looking at a parallel figure to Alexander Hamilton, and that's Thomas Jefferson. Alexander Hamilton came from a very distinctive background that led him to believe in cities, in commerce, and centralized government. Thomas Jefferson came from, as we will see, a very different background. And he liked more the rural life and agriculture and the value of the individual and the states. So we can see very different values leading to very different ideas about what the United States would be and what the government would be like. So I think that the takeaway here is very much about how do our lives lead to certain values, and then how does that lead to what choices we make about things we pursue as creative problem solvers. There's one more thing I want to talk about with Hamilton that is maybe one of the most interesting things to me about Alexander Hamilton. And it also deals with one of the other key terms that we've been looking at this semester. So one of those 10 terms was confidence. And values, vision, and design, those are 3 of those 10 terms. But one other one I want to just talk about as a footnote here is confidence. How in the world did this guy get the confidence that he had? And this guy came from nowhere. And he ends up being, Secretary of Treasury and having this enormous impact and being in the Constitutional Convention at age 32. How does he have the confidence to do this? And it's kind of baffling in some ways. But I would make the argument that he gained confidence by incremental small successes. So he did not begin confident. You remember way back when he was in the Caribbean, and he wrote that letter about the hurricane. And Hugh Knox said, yeah, we need to publish this in the newspaper. And he said, no. I'm just a kid. I can't do that. He did not have any confidence in his observations or his intelligence, his ability, his perception. He didn't have confidence. But he had incremental small successes from that. He began to get some responsibility in his mercantile apprenticeship. And he was so successful there that when his boss went away on a business trip, he left 14-year-old Alexander Hamilton in charge instead of somebody else because he was super responsible and intelligent. That would have given Alexander Hamilton a small success. And then when they published that letter and it got very positive response, it was another incremental small success, and he got a positive feedback from the other business people in the Caribbean. And then when they decided to send him to get an education, that was another incremental small success. And a little setback at Elizabethtown Academy where he didn't get into Princeton. But then when he joined the militia and was working under Washington there and had an idea for how to strategize a way to get away from the British Army more effectively, he had another incremental small success. And then when Washington made him aide de camp, it's another incremental small success. And slowly he builds up the confidence that then when he gets to the Constitutional Congress, he's able to say, I believe in this. I think this is important. And he might even lose, but he has the confidence to say it and advocate for it. And this is huge in being a creative problem solver, because when you have new ideas like he did, they're gonna get shot down by somebody. You have to take that risk when you're putting them out there. And in order to take that risk, you've got to have some confidence. So he's a great example of going from no confidence when he was a kid to gaining great confidence. And that confidence was essential in making the kind of contribution he did. Okay, we'll talk more about this, especially that notion of confidence in the check-in. So see you later.